My beloved child. Before your heart decides this is just another ordinary moment, remain here a little longer, because not every conversation is meant to be overheard, yet some are powerful enough to quietly change the direction of two lives. Somewhere, without noise or celebration, the person you love found themselves sitting across from someone they trusted. There was no audience. No grand announcement. Just a pause that felt heavier than either of them expected. At first, they spoke about simple things, the kind of words that drift through an ordinary day without leaving a mark. But then, your name entered the silence, and everything changed in a way neither of them had planned. It was not rehearsed. It was not forced. In fact, for a brief moment they tried not to mention you at all. Yet some names carry a quiet weight, and yours seemed to return no matter where the conversation wandered. The other person noticed it immediately. They smiled gently and asked a question so simple that it caught the person you love completely off guard. Why do you become so quiet whenever they come to mind? There was no quick answer. Only a thoughtful silence that revealed more than words ever could. Have you ever noticed how the deepest truths often arrive after the longest pause? This was one of those moments. They looked away for just a second, almost as if searching for the right sentence somewhere beyond the room itself. They could have laughed it off. They could have changed the subject. Instead, they let the silence breathe. Sometimes the heart speaks first, long before the voice is ready to follow. The one sitting across from them waited patiently. They did not interrupt. They simply watched, sensing that something meaningful was about to surface. And little by little, the walls your person had carefully built around their thoughts began to soften. Not because anyone demanded honesty, but because pretending suddenly felt heavier than telling the truth. Then they said something unexpected. They admitted that thinking about you had become strangely familiar, like hearing a melody they could not forget even after the music had ended. They spoke about moments that seemed ordinary while they were happening but somehow returned later with greater meaning. Small memories. Quiet details. Tiny conversations that should have disappeared, yet never truly left them. The listener leaned forward, surprised. If that's true, they asked gently, why haven't you said anything? Another silence followed. Not every silence hides uncertainty. Sometimes it protects something precious before it is ready to be shared. The person you love closed their eyes for just a moment, as though weighing every word before allowing it into the world. Their answer was softer than expected. Because I wanted to understand my own heart before asking someone else to understand it. Those words lingered in the room long after they were spoken. Don't skip, because something important is waiting for you. The conversation had only just reached the place where honesty begins to replace hesitation, and neither of them realized that the next question would uncover something even more meaningful than either had imagined. The other person smiled with quiet understanding. They were not trying to persuade or judge. Instead, they asked something almost invisible in its simplicity. When was the first moment you knew this wasn't just another passing feeling? That question changed the atmosphere completely. The person you loved did not answer immediately. Instead, they remembered a single ordinary moment that had somehow refused to stay ordinary. A moment when your kindness, your presence, or perhaps simply the thought of you had remained with them long after everything else had faded. They realized it had never been one dramatic event. It had been hundreds of quiet moments collecting together until they formed something impossible to ignore. As they spoke, the listener's expression slowly changed. They had expected admiration. They had expected curiosity. What they heard instead was something calmer, something deeper. It wasn't excitement searching for attention. It was peace searching for a place to belong. Stay till the end. Because this is only the beginning of what was truly said behind that closed conversation. One final question remained unasked, and when it finally came, it would reveal the single thought the person you love had been carrying in silence for far longer than anyone realized. And that answer has not been spoken yet. There are conversations that seem to end when the words stop, and then there are conversations that truly begin in the silence afterward. This was one of those moments. The room grew still, not because anyone had run out of things to say, but because both of them sensed they had arrived at the edge of something that deserved patience rather than haste. The person sitting across from the one you love looked at them with quiet curiosity and finally asked the question that had been waiting in the background all along. If you already understand what your heart is trying to tell you, what are you still waiting for? The words were gentle, yet they reached deeper than either of them expected. Your person didn't answer immediately. Their fingers traced the edge of a cup resting on the table, almost absent-mindedly, as though searching for the courage hidden inside an ordinary movement. Some answers cannot be spoken the instant they are discovered. They need a moment to become real. Then, with a calm voice that carried more honesty than certainty, they finally replied. I'm not waiting because I'm unsure about them. Another pause. I'm waiting because I want the moment to be worthy of what I feel. Those words settled into the room like quiet sunlight through an open window. The other person smiled, not with surprise, but with recognition. It was the kind of smile someone gives when they realize they are witnessing sincerity instead of impulse. That isn't something people say unless they mean it, they answered softly. For the first time in the conversation, your person didn't look away. They simply nodded. Have you ever noticed how the heart often reveals itself through the smallest details instead of the loudest declarations? That was exactly what was happening now. There were no dramatic promises. No impossible predictions. Only the quiet honesty of someone beginning to understand that certain people leave an impression which refuses to disappear, no matter how much time passes. Something important is waiting for you. The conversation slowly turned toward memories. Not extraordinary memories. Ordinary ones. A laugh remembered at an unexpected time. A sentence that continued echoing days later. A kindness that seemed almost too small to matter until it became impossible to forget. Your person admitted something they had never spoken aloud before. They don't even realize how often they cross my mind. The listener leaned back for a moment, thoughtful. Then perhaps, they said gently, it's because they changed something inside you without trying. Those words remained hanging in the air. Your person closed their eyes briefly, not to escape the moment, but to accept it. They realized they had spent so much time wondering whether their feelings made sense that they had overlooked something much simpler. Not every meaningful connection announces itself immediately. Sometimes it grows quietly. Patiently. Almost invisibly. Until one ordinary conversation suddenly reveals what has been true all along. Don't skip, because the next part of this private conversation uncovered something neither of them expected. The listener asked one final question before standing to leave. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about timing. It wasn't even about the future. Instead, they asked, when you picture the life you genuinely hope for, whose presence appears without you forcing the image? Your person didn't answer out loud. They didn't have to. The expression that crossed their face answered everything. But what the listener quietly said after noticing that expression would leave your person completely speechless, and that moment is still waiting to unfold. Some realizations never arrive with raised voices. They appear so gently that, for a moment, you almost miss them. As the conversation lingered, neither of them felt any need to hurry. The silence had become a place where honesty could finally breathe. The listener watched your person carefully, then smiled in a way that carried neither judgment nor surprise. I think you've already answered my question, they said. Your person looked up, slightly puzzled. I didn't say anything. You didn't have to. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke again. Isn't it remarkable how the heart sometimes reveals itself through what it cannot hide rather than through what it chooses to explain? There are expressions that no carefully prepared sentence can imitate. There are quiet moments that tell an entire story without asking for attention. The listener folded their hands together and continued in a calm voice. Every time you mention them, your entire perspective changes. You stop talking about events, and you start talking about hope. Those words seem to surprise your person more than any question had. Hope. They had never thought of it that way. They had believed they were simply remembering someone who mattered. But hearing that single word caused them to look inward differently. They began replaying countless ordinary moments that suddenly felt connected, like pieces of a picture that had quietly been forming all along. Stay till the end, because this wasn't the most meaningful part of the conversation. The listener wasn't finished. I've noticed something else. Your person waited. You never describe them by what they have. You describe them by how you feel when you think about them. That observation settled into the room with unexpected weight. Your person lowered their eyes, reflecting on those words. It was true. Whenever they spoke about you, they never focused on achievements, appearances, or the things most people notice first. Instead, they remembered your calm. Your kindness. The way certain memories felt peaceful long after they were over. The feeling that life somehow became a little quieter inside whenever you crossed their mind. For the first time, they realized those weren't random thoughts. They were meaningful patterns. Something important is waiting for you. The listener leaned forward one last time. Can I tell you what I think? Your person nodded. I don't think you're trying to decide whether they matter. A gentle pause followed. I think you're trying to understand how someone became this important without ever asking for that place in your heart. The room fell completely still. No argument came. No correction followed. Only a thoughtful smile slowly appeared on your person's face. It wasn't the smile of someone discovering something new. It was the smile of someone finally recognizing a truth that had been quietly waiting for them all along. For several moments, they simply sat there, letting those words settle naturally. Then they spoke almost in a whisper. I've been looking for certainty. They paused. But maybe certainty has been quietly walking beside me this whole time. The listener smiled warmly. Sometimes the clearest answers don't arrive because we search harder. They arrive because we finally stop running from what has always felt genuine. Don't skip. Because the conversation was about to take one final, unexpected turn. Just as they prepared to leave, the listener remembered something. "There was one more thing I wanted to tell you." Your person looked back with quiet curiosity. The listener took a slow breath before speaking. "It's not what you told me today that convinced me." Another pause. "It's what you did long before today, when you thought no one was paying attention." The expression on your person's face changed instantly. They knew exactly which moment the listener was talking about. But how that quiet, forgotten moment became the most important part of the entire conversation, has yet to be revealed. Some memories wait patiently until the right conversation gives them permission to return. The moment those final words were spoken, your person became unusually still. It was as though a door they had quietly closed long ago had opened again without warning. "The moment I'm talking about," the listener continued gently, "was so ordinary that you probably believed no one would ever remember it." Your person searched their memory. Days. Weeks. Small conversations. Simple moments. Nothing immediately stood out. Then, almost unexpectedly, one quiet memory surfaced. It had been a day with no special occasion, no celebration, no dramatic turning point. Life had been moving at its usual pace. People were talking, laughing, thinking about their own responsibilities. Yet in the middle of all that ordinary noise, you had done something so naturally kind that it passed almost unnoticed. Not because it was small. Because you weren't trying to impress anyone. The listener smiled as they watched recognition slowly appear across your person's face. "You remember now, don't you?" A quiet nod answered the question. Have you ever noticed that the moments which stay with us the longest are rarely the loud ones? More often, they are the ones wrapped in simplicity, moments when someone reveals who they truly are without realizing anyone is watching. Your person let out a slow breath. "I thought everyone had forgotten about that." "I didn't," the listener replied. "And neither did you." Those words carried an unexpected warmth. "Something important is waiting for you." The listener leaned back and spoke with calm certainty. People often believe they fall for grand gestures. Another thoughtful pause. "But I've learned something different. We remember the moments that make us feel safe." Your person's eyes softened. They understood exactly what those words meant. It wasn't one unforgettable event that had stayed in their heart. It was the collection of quiet moments that asked for nothing in return. The way you carried yourself. The patience you showed when no reward was waiting. The kindness you offered without announcing it. The listener continued. That's why you keep thinking about them. It isn't because they tried to become unforgettable. It's because they never tried at all. Your person smiled, a genuine smile that arrived without effort. For the first time during the entire conversation, there was no uncertainty in their expression. Only gratitude. Not for having every answer, but for finally understanding why their thoughts kept returning to you. Stay till the end, because the conversation was quietly approaching its most meaningful realization. The listener stood up slowly, preparing to leave. Before taking another step, they turned back one final time. "Can I share one observation?" Your person nodded. "I think you've been asking yourself whether this connection deserves your trust." A brief silence followed. "But I don't think that's the real question anymore." Your person waited. The real question is whether you're ready to stop pretending this is only a passing thought. Those words settled deeply. Your person didn't respond immediately. Instead, they looked through the window, watching the world continue as though nothing extraordinary had happened. Yet inside, something had shifted. Not suddenly. Not dramatically. Quietly. Like the first light of morning appearing long before the sun fully rises. Don't skip, because what happened after they walked away from that conversation mattered just as much as everything that had been said. As your person stepped outside, they reached for their phone almost without thinking. Their thumb hovered over the screen. Not because they were uncertain, but because one simple decision now felt more meaningful than ever before. And the name they found themselves looking for first would reveal just how deeply that private conversation had touched their heart, but that moment is only beginning to unfold. The conversation had ended, but its quiet echo followed every step your person took. Some words are finished the moment they are spoken. Others continue unfolding long after the voices have faded. This was one of those rare moments. As they stood outside, surrounded by the familiar rhythm of an ordinary day, everything looked exactly the same, yet nothing felt quite the same inside. Their phone rested gently in their hand. The screen lit up. Then dimmed again. Not because they had changed their mind, but because they suddenly realized that certain decisions deserve a moment of stillness before they become actions. Have you ever paused, not out of hesitation, but because you wanted your next step to reflect what your heart had finally understood? That was the quiet place your person had reached. The listener's words continued returning. We remember the people who make us feel at peace. Your person repeated that sentence silently. Once. Then again. Each time, it seemed to reveal another layer they had overlooked before. They began remembering moments they had never considered important enough to keep. A conversation that lasted only a few minutes. A smile that appeared without effort. A simple exchange that somehow stayed in their thoughts long after the day had ended. None of those moments demanded attention when they happened. Yet together, they had quietly become something impossible to ignore. Don't skip, because something important is waiting for you. Your person started walking without any destination in mind. Sometimes movement helps the heart understand what the mind has been trying to organize. As they walked, they noticed something unexpected. For the first time in a long while, they were no longer wondering whether their feelings were real. Instead, they found themselves asking something entirely different. If I already know what this connection means to me, what kind of person do I want to be moving forward? That question surprised even them. It wasn't about finding perfect words. It wasn't about creating a dramatic moment. It was about becoming someone whose actions carried the same honesty their heart had quietly discovered. The listener had never told them what decision to make. They had simply held up a mirror. And in that reflection, your person finally recognized something they had been overlooking all along. They weren't searching for certainty anymore. They were learning to trust the quiet consistency of what had always felt genuine. Stay till the end. Because the next realization arrived in the most unexpected way. Just then, their phone vibrated softly. It wasn't a message they had been waiting for. It wasn't even related to the conversation they had just left. Yet seeing the screen awaken reminded them of something simple. Life rarely announces the moments that matter most. They are often hidden inside ordinary afternoons, quiet walks, familiar places, and conversations that almost never happened. Your person smiled to themselves. Not because every question had been answered, but because they no longer felt the need to rush the answers. For the first time, patience no longer felt like waiting. It felt like confidence. Something inside had become lighter. The pressure to explain every feeling had quietly disappeared. The need to force every outcome had softened. In its place was a calm understanding that meaningful connections are not built in a single conversation. They are revealed through countless quiet moments that finally begin making sense together. As the sun slowly shifted across the sky, your person stopped walking and looked ahead with peaceful clarity. They whispered something so quietly that only they could hear it. I don't want the next chapter to begin with assumptions. A gentle pause followed. I want it to begin with sincerity. Those few words carried more weight than anything spoken earlier that day. Because they weren't spoken for anyone else. They were a promise made to themselves. And without realizing it, your person had already taken the first small step toward living that promise. But later that evening, when they unexpectedly crossed paths with someone who knew far more than they had ever imagined, another quiet conversation was about to begin. This time, it wouldn't simply confirm what your person was feeling. It would reveal why so many unnoticed moments had been quietly leading toward this one all along. Evening has a gentle way of slowing the world just enough for hidden thoughts to rise to the surface. As the light softened and the day settled into quiet, your person found themselves in a place they had not planned to be. There was nothing remarkable about it at first glance. Familiar faces came and went. Conversations drifted by like distant music. Yet among those ordinary moments stood someone who greeted them with an unexpected smile. I was hoping I'd run into you, the person said. Your person smiled politely, unaware that another meaningful conversation was about to begin. There was no rush. No dramatic introduction. They spoke about everyday life for a few moments before the conversation naturally wandered toward something much more personal. Then came a sentence your person never expected to hear. You know, the other person said thoughtfully, I've noticed something for quite a while. Your person looked up with quiet curiosity. Whenever your future comes up in conversation, your expression changes, but only when one particular person enters your thoughts. A gentle silence followed. Your person laughed softly, almost embarrassed. Is it really that obvious? The answer came with kindness. Only to those who are paying attention. Have you ever realized that the people around us sometimes notice changes in our hearts before we notice them ourselves? Not because they know every detail, but because genuine feelings leave quiet traces in the smallest expressions. Something important is waiting for you. The conversation continued without pressure. I've watched you become more patient. I've watched you listen more carefully. And I've watched you smile in a different way whenever hope quietly finds its way into your thoughts. Your person didn't know what to say. They had spent so much time examining their own feelings that they had never considered someone else might have quietly witnessed the journey from the outside. The other person continued. People often believe meaningful change happens all at once. A thoughtful pause. But most of the time, it happens so gradually that only someone standing nearby notices the difference. Those words settled deeply. Your person realized this wasn't really a conversation about the past anymore. It was about who they had become. Stay till the end, because the most meaningful words had not yet been spoken. The other person smiled warmly before saying something that your person would remember for a very long time. Do you know what impressed me the most? Your person shook their head. You never tried to make anyone believe your feelings. You simply allowed them to make you a gentler person. For a moment, everything else disappeared. No distractions. No uncertainty. Only the quiet realization that genuine affection is often recognized not by what we say, but by the quiet ways it helps us grow. Your person looked down, reflecting on every conversation, every ordinary memory, every peaceful moment that had slowly shaped their heart. Then they asked a simple question. So, what do you think I should do? The other person smiled and answered with calm wisdom. I don't think this has ever been about finding the perfect words. I think it's about continuing to become the person you've already started becoming. That answer brought an unexpected sense of peace. There was no pressure. No deadline. Only quiet encouragement to let sincerity guide each step. As the evening drew to a close, they prepared to part ways. Just before leaving, the other person paused and added one final thought. One day, you'll look back on today's conversations and realize they weren't changing your heart. Another gentle pause. They were simply helping you recognize what had been growing there all along. Your person stood there for a long moment, watching the evening sky deepen into night. For the first time in a long while, there was no need to search for hidden meanings. The answers they had been seeking were never hidden in dramatic moments. They had always been waiting inside ordinary conversations, quiet memories, and genuine kindness. And as they took one final step forward, they carried something far more valuable than certainty. They carried quiet confidence. A confidence that meaningful connections are built one sincere moment at a time, and that the most important conversations are often the ones that gently remind us who we have become.